When is the last time I came on air and said to you, I think that a politician's performance during a potential or a period of crisis has been close to perfect? When's the last time I did that? I don't know that I ever have, actually. And oddly, it's not just the politician I'm going to be saying that about this morning. I would suggest that Sir Mark Rowley's response to Donald Trump's lies about London, which are lifted wholesale from Russian bots, racists and Nigel Farage fans, although I appreciate that if that were a Venn diagram, it would look a lot like a circle. Russian bots, Russian bot farms, trolls, obvious white supremacist racists and Nigel Farage fans who obviously don't live in London, because if they did, they wouldn't be able to lie straight in bed after claiming that this city is at some particular peril. So Mark Rowley has probably responded to them in terms that are close to perfect. And I think we may talk about both today. In fact, we'll examine both slightly hyperbolic claims of mine that these men have both come close to political perfection. So, no, I said nice things about Matt Hancock. I definitely never said he was handling things perfectly. I fully appreciate that is the biggest historical example of the curse of O'Brien, which is not confined to right-wing politicians, by the way. Whenever I say nice things about anybody, they end up letting us down. Maybe that's why I've got this reflex reaction now to people who are pulling ahead of the pack. If I join in and say, oh, yes, he's got leader written all over him, then it'll turn out tomorrow that he tortures puppies for fun at weekends, or similar. But I think it's healthy as well. You know, if you are relying on me to help you form the opinions you need to vote and think in evidence-based, informed, fact-based fashion, then I can't get caught up in other people's cults. I can't get caught up in other people's fan clubs, even if I am sometimes tempted to. So we are, I think, facing a bit of a flumageddon. You can have that for nothing if you want. I think there's a bit of a flumageddon on the horizon. Clearly, the figures are much greater than this time last year, much, much greater than 2 or 3 years ago. There'd be various reasons for that. But the incidence of flu, whether you're looking at it from a big picture or a little picture perspective, it's looking pretty hairy, right? It's looking pretty scary. It's not just the politicians telling us that, it's the NHS professionals and the NHS leadership. And you can't help but feel that for resident doctors to go on strike now, to go on strike next week, in full knowledge that the NHS is under mortal threat from a flu, a particularly virulent flu epidemic that is currently growing at a rate of knots, you can't help thinking that it would be a particularly ill-advised position for resident doctors to take. Well, at least I would say at the first turn, at the first glance, this so-called super flu. Outbreaks in schools, for example, are off the charts. Some of these graphs are proper double-take, head-turning territory, caused up by a particularly infectious strain, with health chiefs describing a, and I quote now, worst-case scenario. Hospital admissions for flu up by more than 50% in a week. Chemists, it happened to me yesterday. I went to 3 separate chemists, 2 Boots and a Superdrug, which is a dreadful rewriting of the Partridge in a Pear Tree song, isn't it? 2 Boots and a Superdrug yesterday, and 3 of them, or was it 2 Superdrugs and a Boots? Hang on, 3 calling birds, 2 Superdrugs and a Boots, and none of them had a jab. And none of them had a flu jab, which I wanted to get. Because if I'm going to ail a bit with the side effects, I'd rather I did it over the weekend. You see, when you don't rely upon me to entertain you and inform you. So if I'm going to feel a little bit crook, as you sometimes do with jabs, but I didn't last time, that was the plan. So I'll be out today as well after the show, looking for chemists that have doses. In fact, if you are a chemist and you have got doses and you are en route from London's fashionable Leicester Square back to Brentford, then let me know and I'll see you later. But they were running out, so I know that that's true as well. I also know 2 teenage boys who are who have been hospitalised, one with an infection that moved and one who was just simply absolutely banjaxed by it, so they had to put him on a drip. And I don't know why. I find the fact that they are teenage boys, or fighting age boys, as you have to say in the land of Farage, fighting age boys, you sort of think of them as being more physically robust. They're certainly more physically robust than me or their nans, aren't they? And they've fallen pretty hard with it. Particular problem, of course, is that you can't get the vaccination if you are aged between 2 and 17. Or I think that's right. 4 million children remain unvaccinated, aged between 2 and 17. By the end of October, no, you can get vaccinated. You just couldn't get. We couldn't get one yesterday for my 17-year-old. I don't know about the detail of it, and that's not what our conversation is about today. Here is the question. Wes Streeting has called upon doctors, resident doctors, not to strike. And that bit is fine. That is what you would expect. But he's also offered to extend the mandate. So rather than striking next week, having a survey this weekend and deciding whether or not the strike goes ahead, rather than do that, he has suggested that they work through the flu outbreak and come back in January, at which point he will extend the mandate that is currently in place. So the last positive strike vote runs out of road, if you see it, I guess towards the end of this month. And as Health Secretary, he can, I presume he has the authority to say, don't worry about the mandate. You don't need to have a full reballot. You can do next month the survey you were going to do this weekend and just decide whether the support is there for strike action. And we often expect our politicians to come up with answers to insoluble problems. And I am here, and the phone lines are open for you to attack me, hopefully in slightly polite fashions, please, because I can't remember the last time I heard a politician come up with something that sounded both constructive and correct. In a moment of crisis, not like a overall policy announcement. I really like what Lisa Nandy had to say this week, for example, about youth clubs. But in terms of an imminent crisis, and there is an iceberg ahead, and the captain of the ship, in this case the NHS, has, to my mind, issued really good orders precisely because of that postponement of the mandate. That's the bit that strikes me as both creative and correct. In fact, I would go so far as to say that if you were not in favour of complete capitulation, what Wes Streeting has done with regards to the deal offered, the promises made to resident doctors, which address some of the things that pops up on this programme, caller after caller after caller, insisting that they were not on strike exclusively, and in many cases not even at all, for greater pay. They were on strike in pursuit of better terms and conditions, especially for the trainees, the doctors, the resident doctors who were coming up in generations after theirs. He appears to have put together a package for precisely those resident doctors, present and future, that addresses many of the problems. And with regard to the postponement of the mandate, I think he's closed down all avenues of complaint until you tell me otherwise. Listen, it doesn't actually make for brilliant radio when we all agree that a politician has done something right. But every now and then I think it's important that we do it. I'm not suggesting for a minute you have to ring me to agree with me, but if it turns out that way, what I suppose I want is a junior doctor who's unpersuaded, a resident doctor who is unpersuaded by this. The Holy Grail, perhaps? A resident doctor who was in favour of strike action but believes that the Health Secretary has done enough to assuage their concerns. We heard a couple of potentials in that category on the breakfast show this morning. And of course, because of the way that I'm framing the question, we can all get involved. This isn't just about resident doctors. This is about whether or not you, as a voter and a potential patient or an actual patient in the NHS, feel that the Secretary of State for Health is, I'm going to say it, all right, I think he's playing a blinder. I'm not persuaded that he's the king across the water. I'm not persuaded that he's the answer to all Labour's problems. I'm not even persuaded that he's a shoe-in to be the next Labour leader. He's got a small problem called the actual party membership to get over first, as well as lots of rivals in the event of Keir Starmer running out of road. But this morning, as of this morning, with regard to this crisis, this combination of crisis, the flu epidemic exploding, super flu exploding, and resident doctors still intending to go on strike next week, I think Wes Streeting has played a blinder. Do you? 0345 6060 973. That's it. That's the question. I think he's played a blinder. Do you agree? Whether you're a resident doctor, whether you are... whether you haven't been to see a doctor for 30 years or whether you're only just getting across the facts now as I share them with you. They're supposed to be going out on strike next week. There is a massive super flu crisis. There is a strike mandate in place, and the Secretary of State for Health says, help us get through this crisis, and then come January, we can get back to where we are today. But let's just press pause for a month and put the welfare, the safety, the health of the nation first. I think it's a blinder.